Well, this is Dr. Cunningham. She is currently serving as the president of Taylor University. You're going to tell us a little bit about Taylor and all that stuff. That'll be great.
Taylor.
Awesome. She used to be the executive director of the Center for Bioethics and Human Dignity, was a professor at Trinity Law School and Trinity Graduate School, and as I said, she's back at her alma mater in Taylor University, which is in Indiana. Tell us a little bit about that, and welcome, Dr. Cunningham.
Well, thank you, Dan. I want everybody to stand up. You've been sitting too long. We all know you need to stand every hour. We have our devices to remind us. Shake your arms, wiggle a little bit, breathe deeply. Buzz Lightyear, breathe deeply. Okay, I don't have an awesome PowerPoint like John, so my skills are not there, and I'm wearing a jacket. Can you bear with me for the next 40 minutes? All right, good. All right, so I'm really excited to be here. I do have Texas relatives, so I know about the Texas bubble. It's a big, big bubble, and I know that there's a school that sounds like Taylor that tracks most of you. But if you are interested in a place where you can strengthen your relationship with God, where you're interested in academic discipleship, in faculty who get to know you really, really well, who invite you into their homes, who really pour their lives into you, a place where residence life is strong, extracurricular activities are fun, and where chapel is the heart of the week. For many of our students, chapel is their very favorite time of the week. And guess what? We don't take attendance at chapel because we don't have to. Students want to be there. They feel the presence of God working in their hearts and in their lives. We also have strong academic preparation. For example, our students in kinesiology who want to go into physical therapy are some of the top picks for the doctoral program at Washington University, which is the #1 PT school in the US. So I just decided to give that little bonus there for you. We also have an incredible film and media department. Our stage is not quite as big as this one, but our students do get to use red cameras, and they're using equipment that grad students at the LA Film School get to use, but you get to do that as an undergraduate. I think there's some material somewhere out there, but you can always go online and take a virtual tour. So I would love to see you on campus for a visit as soon as COVID lets us do overnight visits. We are still doing on-campus visits, but it's the overnight visit that actually lets you see what's the school really like, because there's not somebody who's paid to make you think the school is great. You get to talk to real students, and they can tell you the real truth about Taylor. So what I want to do this morning is to answer some questions and raise some other questions for you. This will kind of follow on to what John was talking about. You're going to hear a few themes, but you're going to hear a little different way to think about them. Which is part of learning. So here are some of the questions I'm going to answer. I'm going to answer the question, what is bioethics? I was asked to talk about bioethics and technology. How many of you know what bioethics is, or have at least heard of it, heard it mentioned? Okay, so this will be a real opportunity to give you an introduction to some of the topics of bioethics. What are the basic questions of bioethics? I'm going to give you 2 questions that help you unpack a lot of the ethical questions. Third, how can the Bible help us when it comes to bioethics? There's no mention of bioethics in the Bible, and yet we just heard how the Bible helps us think about technology. And fourth, some questions on how do we think about technology, even beyond the communications technology and digital technology, but technology in general. So what is bioethics? I'm going to give you 2 definitions. The first one is the more academic definition, and there are lots of different ways to define bioethics. This definition by a historian of bioethics, Dr. Albert Johnson, it's an interdisciplinary study of the moral dimension of practices and discoveries in medicine, science, and technology, with attention to the nature of such advances as they impact our individual and common humanity. What that means is these technologies don't just affect us individually, they affect us as people. And we just heard a very careful walk through how technologies can shape us in ways for good and ways that are not so good. The way that most people encounter bioethics is in making wise decisions about medical technologies. Every one of you in here is going to make a bioethical decision at some point in your lifetime. It might be about the beginning of life. You may be considering an abortion decision. More likely, at your age, you would encounter at the end of life. You may hear your parents talking about your grandparents and whether to put them on a ventilator or whether to withdraw treatment or how to care for grandma and grandpa. And maybe some of you have gone through that situation hearing your parents talk about it. The problem is you don't know when that moment's going to arise. And when it comes, it's usually accompanied by intense emotional turmoil. It may not be accompanied by what I would call moral turmoil over wanting to do the right thing. It might be something just driven by what can we afford, what will the neighbors think, but it's not accompanied by serious ethical reflection. But the study of bioethics is a study to help you be better equipped to make wise decisions about not only medical technologies, but all the technologies that intersect with bioethics. Dr. Maggie Little, who's the director of the Kennedy Institute of Ethics at Georgetown, introduces their MOOC course, and be kind of a fun course to go online and watch if you're interested in bioethics. And she walks us through some of the basic technologies of bioethics and some of the basic questions. So let's take a minute and watch Dr. Little.
This is a MOOC on bioethics. What is bioethics anyway? It's a field that explores challenging moral issues in healthcare, the environment, emerging technologies. Some of the issues are brand new ones, from advances in technology that would have sounded like science fiction not too long ago, gene splicing, growing organs in a laboratory. Some are issues as old as the human condition itself, that we get ill, we face death, we give birth. Together, we're going to explore some of the most compelling issues in the field. Are performance-enhancing drugs cheating? Is it ever okay for doctors to lie to their patients? What do drug companies owe to the world's poor? Are genetically modified foods a problem? How about genetically modified animals? And what about climate change and environmental justice? What do we owe future generations? Whoever you are, wherever you live, these are issues that affect all of us. Come join the conversation.
So we're not going to join the Georgetown conversation, but we are going to continue the conversation. So I want to help give you a couple of tools to understand some of the basic topics of bioethics. And I used to direct the Center for Bioethics and Human Dignity at Trinity International University in Illinois. And we've developed these tools to help get your arms around all the topics because it can kind of overwhelm you. So the rubric we use is Bioethics 1.0 and 2.0. And Dr. Nigel Cameron gave us some nicely rhyming words for 1.0, taking and making life, and 2.0, faking life. So let me walk you through some of those topics. Taking life, abortion is clearly an action of taking the life of a very tiny human being. Sometimes end-of-life decisions can be taking life. If you've heard of the word euthanasia, which is an action with an intent that that life of that person be shortened or taken immediately. Assisted reproductive technologies, ART for short, probably the most familiar and commonly used assisted reproductive technology is in vitro fertilization. And in IVF, life can be taken or lost. And so one of the challenges for Christians is if you are going down the path of IVF, can you do so ethically without harming another human being? Embryo stem cell research is another technology that involves both making life, as increasingly embryos are made to order for research, but also taking life as by participating in research, unwillingly of course, those embryos are destroyed. Once their research purpose has been served, then they're discarded. The bioethics 2.0 issues are the faking life issues, and this is where things get really interesting and really complex, kind of geeky, and depending where you are on the spectrum, you might think some of these things are really cool, or you might think these are really gross. Synthetic biology, this would be creation of human cells. Dr. Craig Venter was the first one to announce the creation of a synthetic cell, and he made sure that he proved that he had successfully created a cell that could replicate because he, in the DNA, inserted his signature, an act of pretty incredible hubris. Human-animal hybrids. If you have, say, a grandmother who's had a pig heart valve transplanted, that would be a kind of human-animal hybrid. So it can be done at the adult stage where the cells are not going to mix. They can also be done at the cellular or embryonic stage where there can be much more of a mixture of the cells throughout the body. Some of these are certainly more problematic than others. Enhancement technologies. This is a wide range. There can be a whole range of drugs to enhance the human body or mental abilities or your emotional state, as well as surgery. There are all kinds of enhancement surgeries, some which involve implantation of other devices and some which do not. Gene editing, you're probably familiar with those. There are two kinds of gene editing technologies. One is called somatic cell, where it's done in the body of the patient, and the change benefits the patient. The more common one and the more well-known one today is what we call germline editing, where it's done at a very early age or very early stage. And those changes are throughout that organism's body. It's also done in animals and also in plants quite successfully. And those are inherited for every generation thereafter. So this raises questions of power over future generations. Have any of you heard of C.S. Lewis and the Abolition of Man? Okay, so you'll read in his essay on the abolition of man this issue of power over future generations. CRISPR, which is the most common and currently the most effective gene editing technology, is an example of one generation exercising power, not over your own body, but over every generation that follows. Another 2.0 is computer-brain interfaces. These can be for both good or for ill. I'm going to show you a picture of one that was done to replace a missing eye. It can be done through having a chip to replace or stimulate some function that has been lost or has been injured. Transhumanism is more of a philosophy than an actual technology. It's a way of talking about technologies that basically arise out of either a discontent with God's version 1.0 and an attempt to create a version 2.0, or just the excitement. What if we can make our bodies better than human, better than normal? Is there anything wrong with trying to exceed your natural limits? And is there anything wrong with trying to exceed the natural limits of the human race as a whole? So that's transhumanism, also trying to exceed the natural limits of our lifetime, like aging. Can we live forever? You talked about the singularity. The singularity is also that point at which we can live forever in the mind of Dr. Kurzweil and others who are real fans of transhumanism. Emerging technologies cover a whole array of technologies. This would be things like artificial intelligence, video games to treat disease, self-driving cars. I mean, emerging technologies are just what's kind of out there on the cutting edge. So 1.0 and 2.0, but there's some topics of bioethics that don't fit into those little categories. We call these transcendent topics because these are like fundamental issues that aren't just about making or taking or faking life, but also how we live life in the in-between. Certainly human dignity and respect for persons is one of those really big topics. Public health. We've all been focused on public health this year under COVID. That's really been moved to the forefront of public awareness and global awareness about how things that happen in one place can affect another person on the other side of the world. Disability ethics, global ethics, women's health, these are issues that involve our lifetime when we're not making, taking, or faking life. So every time I update this, I go to the headlines of current news because the news is changing so quickly. And once you have bioethics on your mind, you're going to start seeing it everywhere. So these are a few things that are pulled from more recent, everything from 2020. Again, taking and making life, a reminder of the opportunity to actually take a stand for protecting the most vulnerable among us, the unborn. And I mentioned in vitro fertilization just a moment ago. Other aspects of making life at the beginning often involve third parties. So I don't know if you can read this one headline. Found something from Texas. North Texas family celebrates another new life from a uterus transplant clinical trial. So this is from a living donor. Uterus transplants can also be done from deceased donors. And that is what we call a temporary organ transplant. Some women are born without any uterus. It's transplanted into her body for the sake of the pregnancy, and after the pregnancy, it's removed. This raises ethical questions that cross about 5 different classic categories of questions. And this is a commentary by a woman named Sabrina Mado, who says, sci-fi aside, 3-parent babies is the latest designer baby fad and just as harmful. So let me just take a second to tell you what a 3-parent baby is. You've probably been told that all the DNA is in the nucleus of the cell. Well, it's not all there. There are some DNA in the mitochondria, in that goo surrounding the nucleus. Some pretty serious diseases can arise if there is some mistake in the DNA of the mitochondria. So a woman who has defective mitochondria and wants to have a healthy child will seek a donation of an egg from a woman who has healthy mitochondria. So you take out, it can happen one of 2 ways, but you take out the healthy nucleus from the woman who has a mitochondrial mistake, from her egg, remove the nucleus from the healthy mitochondrial egg and put hers in there and then fertilize it. Or it can be done through making 2 embryos and then you destroy one of the embryos to get a healthy embryo. But there is DNA then from 3 people, the father, the mother, and the egg donor. And you say, what does it matter? It's only 1% of the DNA. But do you know that ancestry tracing is the most pure through the female mitochondrial DNA? Because that does not change from mother to daughter, and that's how they've been able to trace the entire population of Jews in Eastern Europe to 4 women through mitochondrial DNA testing. So a woman who had a child with this kind of egg is going to have a daughter whose DNA, mitochondrial DNA, says another woman is her mother. Just a little side there on genetic ancestry tracing. Other third parties would involve surrogate mothers. India has tried to shut the door on this, on having foreigners come in and use their women for gestational surrogacy. And there's been a lot of exploitation around that. The other side of involving a third party, and those women are only valued for their willingness to obey the rules and to give up the child at birth. The other side is college students being targeted for egg donation because they match a certain profile. Historically, the profile was tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, musical ability, smart, and athletic. And I would hit all but one of those. Does that make me more valuable than another woman? It's like picking eggs to order. On the other side, well, maybe there are probably a couple of those I don't really hit, maybe just tall. But anyhow, what's becoming more popular now are those who have a specific ethnic profile, because in certain communities, infertility, not having a child, is a terrible, terrible burden for a woman to bear. Some of the Old Testament stories are still resonant today. And so they want to find someone who has a very close appearance to either the husband or wife that is infertile. I talked about CRISPR gene editing. They are still struggling to make this work in human embryos. Every time you read about CRISPR editing in human embryos, you know that a lot of embryos have been destroyed. This refers to 3 recent studies where they found that there are some massive mistakes that are made in this editing that they did not anticipate. These are embryos made to order with a specific mutation to see if they can edit out that mutation. It worked in one case, like 1/3 of the embryos were failures. In every case, all the embryos died and were destroyed. And so just be careful what you wish for when you get into genetic engineering. There is bioethics humor, by the way. All right, moving right along. Taking life, technology, and the end of life. I mentioned earlier the concern about ventilators. It's not just grandparents at the end of life, but under COVID, there's been real concern, particularly in early months, about access to ventilators. That raises the questions of who gets to have a ventilator? Who should decide? Should it be the hospital administrator? Should it be the doctor? Should it be the community? How do we decide who gets ventilators when there aren't enough to go around? It hasn't been a huge problem in the United States. Outside the United States, access to resources and rationing of resources is a big, big problem. Organ donation can be done for really wonderful and altruistic reasons, or it can be exploitative, depending how it's carried out. One of the ways where bioethical issues intersect is under COVID-19, they're having a real shortage of organ donors. People are just afraid. They're afraid to be even involved with the healthcare system. So I mentioned earlier some of the faking life issues, fake biotech, emerging tech, synbio, and nanotech. All these issues and images can be found at bioethics.com, which is one of the websites that we ran at the Center for, and still run at the Center for Bioethics and Human Dignity. So if you want to dig into any of those, it's full of the latest news stories in about 40 different topics. But a couple of examples of what happens with this whole area of faking life, and that is the question of species boundaries. We just heard how phenomenally creative human beings are, how that's a great gift from God, how human beings alone, of all living things, of all species, are created in God's image. Does that matter? Where are species boundaries? There's sort of a philosophical argument about species boundaries, and then there's a biological, genetic argument about species boundaries. When do we approach the edge of those boundaries and say, oh, this far and no farther? So, for example, the bionic ear. It's introducing something not from another species, but something mechanical into an ear. For somebody who has lost their hearing, that could be a really awesome thing. I think we could agree with that. What if your bionic ear is designed to allow you to hear the whispering on the back row up there? Like a parabolic microphone. Would that be okay? What if it was for military purposes? What if that was the only way that we could find out if somebody was planning a bioterrorist attack on the US? Would that be okay? This picture of the man on the right is an example of transhumanism, although I say it's not entirely transhumanism, but this is a man who, through a shotgun accident, lost his right eye. And so he's had a series of these video camera implants, and he's right now the only one in the world, at least as of the date of this article, which is just a few weeks ago. So he calls himself an eyeborg. And that video camera helps replace the lost sight of his eye. I think we can say that's a good thing. Without two eyes, you don't have depth perception. Well, what if his video camera would allow him to see what you're reading on the back row? Or what if his video camera would allow him to see through walls, like Superman? Those are important questions. Are there limits? Is there a difference between a prosthetic and an enhancement? And can he keep upgrading it because he has the original problem? Well, I lost an eye, so I can do as much as I want. It's my body, my eye. It's none of your business. What are the boundaries with human-animal hybrids and then xenotransplantation? That's when you have a transplant from one species into another. So I mentioned pig valves earlier. Now they're working on a pig heart, which may help deal with this incredible shortage of hearts for transplantation. Some organs are really hard to grow in the lab because they have multiple layers of networks of blood vessels and so on, and attachments and nerves, and other organs are a little easier to grow in a lab dish. This is a picture of a humanized mouse, and I don't know if you could read that, but there is implanted human thymus and liver tissue, some of the most desirable fetal tissues. They're really good for testing drugs and toxicity, that have been transplanted into a mouse that has been humanized, so to respond the way human bodies respond, which is better to experiment on mice and do research on mice than on human beings. But the problem is the source of the tissue for the mouse. And that is, it's preferable to have fresh aborted fetal tissue to transplant, which then connects the researcher with the abortion center where the abortion is being done, and the method of the abortion being designed to make as much tissue available as possible. And those are ethical issues completely apart from the death of the fetus and who gets to consent for the death of someone to be used as a research subject. So when we have human-animal hybrids, it's not always beneficial for all the human beings involved. Species boundaries. Are human beings unique? Should we have special rights for primates, the animals that are closest to human beings? There are several attorneys who've been making legal arguments for personhood for the great ape for years. I remember the first one I came across a couple decades ago. And now they have found that this orangutan has been granted personhood, in a sense. It's there in scare quotes. Transhumanism in movies. Are a technologically enhanced human being or a created human being, are they just as valuable as we are? You probably don't know Century Man or iRobot. They're more recent movies, which are actually a lot better in portraying robots, human machines created by human beings to play on our most vulnerable sympathies. They look like us. They're very attractive in the human sense. They move, and then they portray emotion. And the idea of destroying one of those in the movie is a real dilemma because they seem to have become like us. And we're getting closer and closer to creating those just in everyday life. Do we give special rights to human-created robots that look like us? All right, so I want to go through a couple of questions here. How do we think about bioethics as Christians? And then how do we think about technology as Christians? I'm not going to spend too much time on that, although I do want to do just a very quick thumbnail on how the Tower of Babel relates to these bioethical questions. So here are the two big questions of bioethics. If you've got these questions, you have a really good handle on beginning an ethical analysis. The first question, what are the boundaries of human life? In other words, who gets to count as part of the human family? Who gets to sit at the table of protection? Well, the way that our Constitution is designed is to protect the most vulnerable among us. But the way it has been interpreted is to withdraw rights from the most vulnerable among us. So who's at risk right now? Certainly the very, very young, like embryos. There are very few people who can identify with an embryo in a petri dish as the way you can identify with a baby who's 7 months old in the womb. And you can make the argument against abortion. You can't make an argument against what's in a petri dish the same way you make an argument against abortion. So the very, very young, the very, very small. You say, well, it's no bigger than a dot, the dot that we all once were, and it's an argument of discrimination based on size. So it's very small, it's very young, the very weak, the very ill. After all, they consume too many medical resources. The very old, they've stopped contributing to society. The very disabled, they take too many of our current resources. These are the kinds of people who are vulnerable at the margins, who are no longer welcome at the table of the life of the human family. These are easier questions. It's actually a question of what you would call taxonomy or organization, categorization. Is it a human being? Is it a member of the human species? If it is, you don't get to kill it, and you don't get to use it for your own goods, for your own purposes. You might recognize that as utilitarianism. The end does not justify the means. The end of medical research, the end of better cures, does not justify killing a lot of human beings on the way to get those miracles, those therapies, and those cures. The second one is much, much harder, and we were just digging into that. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be created in God's image? What are we here for? How do we flourish? And flourish is one of those big words that you can put all kinds of meaning into. As Christians, we have a different perspective on how we approach that. So I've kind of gone through the sub-questions of that. I go back to the joyful part of being created in God's image. This is not a burden. This is not something that a duty. This is a joy to live into who we were each individually made to be as our individual expressions of God's creativity and his unique design for each one of us, but also who as a human race we are created to be together in community. So I'm going to raise some questions about technology, and then we'll look just very briefly at the Tower of Babel. So there are lots of questions you can ask of technology. I try to distill this down into 4 that will help you, and they'll sound pretty familiar from what we just heard. But who is it for? And thinking specifically about biomedical technologies, who is this for? A human brain interface, one that would allow you to hear what's happening in the back of that room. Who is that for? Is it for everybody in the room, or is it just for the individual who can pay for it? What will be gained and what will be lost? What will this technology give us? We've already, along with having individual Bibles, another thing we've lost is the ability to hear and remember God's word read. So for a number of years now, I've been a little bit of a rebel at our church, because when we stand and read God's word, they say, take out your Bibles or pew Bibles and turn to God's word, and it's up on the screen. I intentionally stop and just listen to the story the way that people did it for thousands of years. That's a discipline, because I don't want to lose my ability to sit and listen for more than 60 seconds. How many of you have been praised for having really beautiful handwriting? Anybody? Or it's a rare trait. Or even legible handwriting these days. Why? Because we've forgotten how to handwrite. I bet nobody in this room under the age of, well, anybody who's a student has had to take cursive. Cursive. Oh, well, yay. The cursive revolution. This is a school. You are perfect for Taylor. Come and bring your cursive trained minds to study with us. But what you lose when you can do everything on a keyboard is handwriting. And my husband complains that my handwriting is getting worse and worse and tinier the less time I spend writing and the more time I spend on the keyboard. But a keyboard is so much faster, and it's legible. So what is lost with technology? Who does it harm? And it might be nobody. But when I think about harm, it might be the harm of coercion, exploitation, commodification. And who controls it? And I think this is the most powerful question of all, if you're thinking about digital technologies or communication technologies, is, am I in charge of my smart device, or is it in charge of me? Do you have anxiety when your battery is just about to run out? If you forget your phone, is it a major event? Well, of course it is, because this is how we relate and communicate with one another. All right, so let's look at the Tower of Babel. You're welcome to read along with me. I want you to listen to this through the lens of technology. And what does this tell us about technology? At one time, all the people of the world spoke the same language and used the same words. As the people migrated to the east, they found a plain in the land of Babylonia and settled there. They began saying to each other, "Let's make bricks and harden them with fire." In this region, bricks were used instead of stone, and tar was used for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let's build a great city for ourselves with a tower that reaches into the sky. This will make us famous and keep us from being scattered all over the world." But the Lord came down to look at the city and the tower the people were building. "Look, the people are united and they all speak the same language. After this, nothing they set out to do will be impossible for them. Come, let's go down and confuse the people with different languages. Then they won't be able to understand each other." In that way, the Lord scattered them all over the world and they stopped building the city. That is why the city was called Babel, because that is where the Lord confused the people with different languages. In this way, he scattered them all over the world. And there was a period in art history, a lot in the 16th century, where many people were painting the Tower of Babel. This is one of the more well-known ones by Lucas van Valkenburg. But this is a very contemporary story, even though this captured the imagination of artists 500 years ago. In it, we find technology used in designing the tower, calculating the materials that would be needed, the desire to make bricks. And you heard that, did you notice that they said stone? Instead of stone, they were using bricks, and instead of mortar, they were using tar. What cataclysmic event happened before the Tower of Babel? It was the Great Flood. And so one of the Jewish rabbis, in interpreting this, says that they were thinking, if we put tar between our bricks, we can get above the flood and save ourselves, that the water will never again destroy us. So the desire to make things, to build bigger, taller, and more impressive buildings is what we call an example of the technological imperative. There is a technological imperative. There is a drive to design and press the edges of human creativity in every dimension of technology. But this wasn't just about building towers, but it was about the effort to conquer nature, to say, never again am I going to be subject to the elements, to the weather. It's also an effort to conquer our own human limitations. So the story of the tower, I'm going to pull out just a couple of very contemporary themes. One is pride. They thought that they could do something to protect themselves, and that they could do it better and taller than anyone else in the world. There was disobedience. God had told them to scatter over the face of the earth and to multiply, and instead they congregated together in a place of safety and common experience. It was a misuse and abuse of their creativity and knowledge, and a pursuit of power and control. So this is an unrestrained expression of their imagination and creativity. We see this reflected in drawings. This is from the movie Metropolis, and you can see it has a very Art Deco look. And if we kind of take the themes from the Tower of Babel to today, here are some of the harms and the dangers of technologies. One is if the goal is to maximize commercial potential, and this often happens when military applications that are funded by the government are then used to turn into commercial purpose, and the technology is handed over to the commercial sector. If the goal is to maximize profits, people may be hurt in the process. If the goal is to enhance personal choice, you may have a harm maybe we don't think about too much, which is the paralysis of choice and having too many choices. When we maximize choice, we don't necessarily maximize freedom. We sometimes decrease freedom and increase paralysis. Exertion of eugenic control, we certainly see this in bioethics, where we're using technologies, for example, in prenatal diagnosis as a way to solve or eliminate Down syndrome, but it's simply eliminating people with Down syndrome, although there's work on the technology to do cognitive enhancement in utero, in the womb. So technology can be used for eugenic purposes, and it also can be used to benefit those who already have a lot, who already have quite a bit, and to build more and more for themselves. So the Lord scattered them from the tower, and it looks like the tower fell into disrepair. It was never finished. A more recent drawing of the Tower of Babel, I don't know if you can make that out. Those are very contemporary buildings, building our current tower. If you read in the book of Daniel, you know that it says in the end times, knowledge will increase exponentially. Well, we certainly have an explosion of data. We have an explosion of information which may lead to knowledge, but knowledge doesn't mean anything until it's turned into wisdom. And we pursue data and information, and maybe secondarily knowledge, but how many are really committed to the deep work of pursuing wisdom, making sense of the data? We've had remarkable discoveries in science, in medicine, and technology, and it's become so regular that it's really kind of ho-hum. There's not much that inspires awe and wonder in us anymore, because every day brings some new discovery or invention that we just come to expect it. This is part of life, to have constant new discoveries and inventions to entertain us, to treat our pain, to make us more comfortable, to help us do our work better. We are still building towers today. On the far left, you see what was at the time called the Kingdom Tower in Saudi Arabia. On the far right, you see the Freedom Tower. If you've been to New York City since 9/11, that's the tower that was built there around the square where the towers collapsed. This tower is designed to be 1 kilometer tall. That's pretty tall. So they started building back in like 2011, and they announced it 2013. Now they've changed the name from Kingdom Tower to Jeddah Tower. And I tried to see what is the latest progress on this tower reaching up to the sky. Every year there's a new update. We're getting ready to resume the work. We're getting ready to start again. As of last year, this is where they are, not very far up. And COVID has stopped things pretty much for this year. So I just want to go back to those questions. Who is the technology for? Some of you in this room are going to be called to work in engineering and biomedical technology. You are going to come up with solutions, devices, technologies to help us solve some of the deepest problems of human health. You are going to take your creative experiences to parts of the world where helping someone face to face, where touching them, which we really don't get to do much during COVID, where being present with them is going to give you an opportunity to minister Christ's redemptive love and truth to a world in need. So don't turn off technology, but just remember, who is this for? Don't be afraid, of invention or edges of the platform that says, stay back here, Paige, don't go out there. So think about it, who is it for? What will be gained and what will be lost? Not everything that's lost is worth weeping over. So I'm not anti-technology, but we have to recognize that sometimes things that are lost are things that were important to us and things that were precious. Frankly, there's something more attractive about a very old black and white photo, and I just saw one at my brother's house yesterday when I was just a baby in Brazil, and I didn't even remember this picture. There's something that was really beautiful about that, and it was seated next to one of those digital frames that cycled through photographs. I was just really drawn to this one because it connected me to my past. How does it connect us not only to our future, but to our past? Who does it harm? And who will be in control of it? Can we hold our technologies loosely so that they don't control us? Can we avoid the direction that they're pushing us? And then the last question is why? Why does this matter? Well, for some of us in this room, you know that it matters because there is a generation yet to come, because you have children. And I have the blessing of being a grandmother, and when I became a grandmother, my perspective on the work that I do changed because it extends beyond me to their generation. And things that are happening now, they will never know about. But what kind of a world am I shaping? What kind of a world am I leaving them? So we think about what is the deep, compelling why? Well, this is my why. This is my family, our 3 married children and our 7 grandchildren. I invite you to think deeply about bioethics and technology, and for some of you, it may be to pursue it in a more intentional way. I'll be here all day, and I look forward to maybe having a chance to interact with some of you in the breakout session this afternoon. But thank you so much for your kind attention.